Battlefront Publishing presents Shadows of Valor. Written by James Krieger and Adolf Riker. Performed by Thomas Richter. Chapter 8. When the unknown descends from heaven, it is the duty of soldiers to make it known to Earth. Soviet Military Doctrine, 1943. October 12, 1945, 22:47 local time. Soviet checkpoint Gamma 87, Thuringian Forest, American occupation zone. The ZSU-37's twin cannons tracked the anomaly through autumn mist. Senior Lieutenant Ryzhkov Matvey Danilovich pressed his eye to the rangefinder scope, breath fogging the optics in the October cold. Whatever flew above the tree line moved wrong, too fast, too violent, engines screaming like tortured metal against the night sky. Range, 4,000 meters, reported Sergeant Kozlov from the gunner's position. His hands worked the elevation controls with mechanical precision, hydraulics whining as the twin 37mm cannons adjusted their angle. Target descending rapidly, multiple engine exhausts visible. Behind them, 1st Company spread through the forest in defensive positions. 43 men in winter camouflage, SVT-40 rifles, and PPSH submachine guns ready. Their breath steamed in the frigid air, white puffs that could give away positions to American patrols operating across the hastily drawn border. Ryzhkov studied the object through his field glasses. Crude, brutal. Like someone had welded scrap metal around rocket engines without caring about aerodynamics. Exhaust flames belched from asymmetrical thrusters, not the clean blue of jet engines, but ragged orange fire that sputtered and roared. The hull looked hammered together from salvaged plates, riveted and welded with no attempt at streamlining. "Comrade Lieutenant," Private Fedorov called from his radio position beneath a camouflaged tarp. "Moscow Control requests identification of aerial contact. Tell Moscow we have unknown aircraft, possibly experimental, appears damaged or primitive construction, preparing to engage." Ryzhkov's fingers found the firing controls, twin triggers that would send armor-piercing rounds into whatever barbarian contraption dared violate Soviet airspace. The craft bucked and weaved through the air like a wounded animal. Its engines fired in uneven bursts, pilot fighting for control against machinery that seemed to hate its operator. Sparks trailed from damaged sections where metal plates had come loose. The thing looked like it had been built in a scrapyard by someone who'd heard aircraft described but never seen one. 2 T-34-85s emerged from concealed positions deeper in the forest. Tank Commander Starshina Petrov's voice crackled over the radio net. "Gamma 87, we have visual on your target. Looks like a flying junk pile. Permission to engage?" "Granted," Ryzhkov replied. "High explosive first. Thing looks fragile enough." The lead T-34's 85mm cannon boomed. Muzzle flash lit the forest like lightning, illuminating bare branches and scattered equipment. The high-explosive round streaked toward the craft, leaving a vapor trail in the cold air. The shell punched through the craft's crude hull like paper. Metal plates peeled back, revealing a superstructure of welded beams and exposed machinery. But instead of falling, the craft belched more fire from its engines and kept flying. Whatever held it together was tougher than its appearance suggested. "Hit but no kill," Petrov reported. "Switching to armor-piercing." The 2nd T-34 fired simultaneously with Ryzhkov's ZSU, 3 weapon systems hammering the craft with everything they had. Armor-piercing shells designed to punch through Tiger tank glacis plates. High-velocity 37mm rounds that could shred aircraft aluminum, all of it striking the ramshackle target in rapid succession. The craft's crude armor held for 3 hits. Then something critical gave way. A fuel line maybe, or a control system jury-rigged with salvaged components. Orange flame erupted from its belly as whatever primitive fuel it burned ignited in the damaged combustion chambers. "All units, concentrate fire," Ryzhkov ordered. "Bring that scrap heap down." The forest erupted in coordinated violence, both T-34s firing as fast as their loaders could ram shells home. The ZSU's twin cannons hammering out rounds at maximum rate. Tracers from infantry positions stitched the sky in deadly patterns. Muzzle flashes strobed between trees like hellish lightning. The craft's death was violent and spectacular. Its ramshackle construction worked against it as structural failures cascaded through the airframe. Welded joints separated under stress. Riveted plates tore free. Engines exploded in sequence as damaged fuel systems fed fires that consumed everything combustible. "It's breaking apart!" Kozlov shouted over the cannon fire. "Target is coming down hard!" The descent became an uncontrolled crash. Burning chunks of hull material tumbled through the air, each piece trailing sparks. The main fuselage, what was left of it, cartwheeled through the canopy, clipping treetops as it plummeted toward the valley below. Toward Malzhausen village, 2 kilometers northeast. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Ryzhkov's voice cut through the chaos. Too late to change the craft's trajectory. They could only watch as the burning wreckage disappeared beyond the tree line, following a ballistic arc that would carry it directly into the German settlement. The impact lit up the horizon. Even at 2 kilometers distance, the explosion was visible as a sudden flare of light above the forest canopy. A fireball climbed into the night sky, painting the low clouds in hues that made Ryzhkov's eyes water. Deep purple flames shot through with veins of crimson, colors that shouldn't exist in any natural fire. "Mother of God," someone whispered from the infantry positions. The strange glow persisted, casting eerie light through the forest. Trees stood silhouetted against the unnatural radiance like skeletal fingers reaching toward heaven. The usual orange-yellow of burning buildings was completely absent, only that disturbing purple-red illumination that pulsed like a massive heartbeat. "Moscow Control, this is checkpoint Gamma 87, Fedorov reported, his voice tight with concern. "Target crashed into civilian area. Village of Malzhausen, 2 kilometers northeast of our position. Large fire in progress. Unknown materials burning." Static answered him. Then, "Checkpoint Gamma 87. Secure the crash site immediately. All civilians to be contained. No one crosses into American zone. This is classified state security matter effective immediately." Ryzhkov felt his blood chill. State security. NKVD. Once they arrived, the situation would escalate beyond simple military operations. Any German civilians who witnessed Soviet forces engaging an unknown aircraft would become permanent security risks. "Tank commanders, advance toward the village," he ordered. "Combat formation. Secure all approaches. Unknown materials burning. Treat as potential hazard." The T-34s ground into motion, their engines coughing diesel exhaust into the cold air. Tank tracks crushed fallen branches as they navigated between the pine trees toward the dirt road that led to Malzhausen. Behind them, 1st Company formed up in combat formation. 3 squads in wedge formation, weapons at the ready. Through his binoculars, Ryzhkov studied the distant glow. The fire burned with steady intensity, but something about the light patterns seemed wrong. The flames didn't flicker naturally. They pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves like breathing. And the colors remained constant, that deep purple shot through with crimson veins that hurt to look at directly. "Sir!" Sergeant Petrov appeared at his shoulder, adjusting the strap of his PPSH submachine gun. "Orders regarding civilian witnesses." Ryzhkov lowered his field glasses. The question hung in the cold air between them. Standard security protocols were clear. No witnesses to classified incidents could be allowed to reach Allied forces. These were German villagers, former enemies of the Soviet state. Their testimony could compromise state security. "Secure first, eliminate if necessary," he decided. "Form containment perimeter around the village. Nobody goes in or out. Any survivors who've seen too much become a disposal problem." The column moved through the forest at tactical speed. Tank engines rumbled in low gear, tracks crunching through fallen leaves and scattered debris. The infantry maintained proper spacing, close enough for mutual support, far enough apart to avoid concentrated casualties if they encountered resistance. 1 kilometer to village perimeter, Tank Commander Petrov reported over the radio. No movement visible, no American forces observed. Ryzhkov raised his binoculars again. From this distance, he could see the village's layout, maybe 30 buildings clustered around a medieval church, or where the church had been. Now, only that pulsing purple glow marked the impact site. The surrounding structures showed varying degrees of damage, some completely consumed, others still standing but affected by the strange fire. "All stations, this is Gamma 87, he broadcast. "Advance to secure crash site. Maintain combat readiness. Unknown aircraft composition. Treat all materials as potentially hazardous. No civilian witnesses." 43 Soviet soldiers and 2 tank crews moved down the hillside toward their first contact with something that definitely wasn't human. Behind them, radio operators prepared to report whatever they found to Moscow control. In the distance, the church bells of other villages began to ring, frantic, irregular pealing that carried for kilometers through the cold night air. The sound of communities raising the alarm, calling for help that might never come, while Malzhausen burned with light from beyond the stars. 347, local time. Displaced Persons Facility, Bavaria, American Occupation Zone. Sergeant Savage rolled from his bunk before the runner finished speaking. The kid, couldn't be more than 19, still green enough to think peacetime meant sleeping through the night, stood breathing hard in the barracks doorway. "Sergeant, Captain Lyndon wants you and your boys ready for immediate deployment. Full combat load. Transport leaves in 30 minutes. Savage was already pulling on his jump boots, muscle memory from 3 years of war. Around him, the other bunks stirred as men processed the words that meant their brief respite from killing was over. "What's the situation?" Savage asked, lacing his boots with practiced efficiency. "Soviets are pushing through some German village, Malzhausen. Scouting elements went dark 3 hours ago. More Red Army units moving into the area." The runner's voice cracked slightly. "Sir, they're saying this might be it. The big one." Savage's hands never paused on his bootlaces. He'd known this day would come. They all had. The only question was when Stalin would decide the alliance had outlived its usefulness. "Wake everyone," he ordered. "Full kit. Weapons checked." The barracks exploded into controlled chaos. Men rolling from bunks, pulling on uniforms still rank with yesterday's sweat. The sounds of war preparation, metal clicking against metal, canvas straps snapping tight, the whispered profanity of soldiers who'd hoped never to do this again. General Patton stood before the wall map like an Old Testament prophet witnessing the apocalypse. Red arrows marked Soviet troop movements converging on a small German village that should have been nothing more than a dot on reconnaissance maps. "Gentlemen," his voice carried the weight of vindication mixed with fury, "what we're seeing is the opening move of World War III." Captain Terence "Gridiron" Lyndon studied the tactical situation from his position at the briefing table. 6'2", built like the linebacker he'd been at West Point, shoulders that had carried him through 3 years of European combat. His uniform bore the standard captain's bars and paratrooper wings, but nothing that hinted at the War College appointment he'd turned down to stay in the field. "Soviet forces began moving at 2300 hours, Boyer reported, his thin frame hunched over intelligence reports. "Initial contact was made by their forward elements near Malzhausen. Since then, we've lost all communication with our listening posts in the area." "How many Reds?" Gridiron asked, his Chicago accent cutting through the formal briefing tone. "Best estimate, company strength infantry with armor support. But more units are moving up from their sector. Could be battalion strength within hours." Patton's riding crop slapped against the map. "This is it, gentlemen. Stalin's testing our resolve, seeing if we'll roll over and let him waltz into the American zone." "Sir," Gridiron leaned forward, "what's so important about one German village? Why would the Soviets risk breaking the alliance over some farmers and a church?" Boyer shuffled through classified reports, his expression troubled. "Unknown. Our last communication from the area mentioned unusual activity, bright lights, some kind of explosion. Then nothing. Probably testing a new weapon," Patton concluded. "Rocket technology, chemical weapons, something they grabbed from the Nazi scientists we didn't get first." His eyes blazed with the light of a man whose predictions were proving accurate. "This is exactly what I've been warning Washington about. While we're sending boys home to civilian life, Stalin's building an empire." Gridiron studied the map, calculating drop zones and approach routes. His finger traced potential landing sites with the methodical precision that had earned him his place in the top 10% of his West Point class. "What's the mission, sir?" "Reconnaissance in force," Boyer answered. 5 C-47s, full company of paratroopers. Drop behind Soviet positions, determine their strength and intentions, delay their advance until armor support can move up. Translation, Patton's voice was granite. "You're buying time while I convince Washington that the real war is just beginning. Every minute you hold gives me ammunition to use against the politicians who think we can negotiate with Stalin." The briefing room's fluorescent lights hummed in the sudden silence. Outside, the sounds of an army preparing for what everyone hoped wouldn't happen. The grinding of tank tracks, the rumble of transport aircraft engines warming up, the sharp commands of officers who'd learned their trade in hedgerows and city streets. "Questions?" Boyer asked. Gridiron stood, his frame unfolding from the briefing chair with athletic grace. "Just one, sir. Rules of engagement?" Patton's smile was winter cold. "You're American paratroopers operating in the American occupation zone. Any Soviet forces you encounter are trespassing." He lit a fresh cigar, the flame illuminating his weathered features. "Use your best judgment, Captain." 5 C-47 Skytrains sat on the tarmac like sleeping giants, engines already warming in the pre-dawn darkness. Ground crews swarmed around each aircraft, loading ammunition and medical supplies while flight engineers conducted final checks. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with morning mist carried across the field. Savage led his squad toward the lead aircraft, jump gear rattling with each step. Full combat load, Thompson submachine gun, 6 magazines, grenades, medical kit, 3 days' rations. The same kit that had carried him from Normandy to Berchtesgaden, now prepped for a war that officially didn't exist yet. "Load up!" Gridiron's voice boomed across the flight line. "First pass over the DZ, no second chances if you miss." 120 paratroopers climbed into the 5 aircraft. Veterans mostly, men who'd survived Market Garden and the Rhine crossing. They moved with the easy confidence of soldiers who'd learned that fear was a luxury you couldn't afford when people were shooting at you. Savage settled into his web seat, Thompson across his knees. Around him, his men checked equipment one final time. 10 minutes to DZ! The crew chief shouted over engine noise. Through the small window, Savage could see the German countryside sliding past below. Forests and fields still scarred by war, villages rebuilding from rubble, a continent trying to forget 5 years of mechanized slaughter. Now they were going back to work. The red light came on. Stand up, hook up, check equipment. Sound off for equipment check, the ancient ritual of airborne infantry preparing to fall from the sky and kill people. "Remember," Gridiron's voice carried over the engine noise, "we're reconnaissance. But if the Reds want to start World War III over some German village, we'll give them a taste of what that means." Green light. The first paratroopers began filing out the door into the slipstream. Savage moved toward the exit, Thompson slung across his chest, hands checking his static line one final time. Behind him, 23 other men shuffled forward in the cramped confines of the C-47's fuselage. The sky erupted in fire. Tracer rounds rose from the forest like deadly fireworks, green and red lines crisscrossing the darkness. The ZSU-37's twin cannons hammered the night sky while infantry positions opened up with everything they had. Muzzle flashes strobed between trees as Soviet forces poured anti-aircraft fire into the American formation. "Flak! Flak! Flak!" someone screamed over the intercom. The second C-47 in formation took a direct hit from the ZSU's 37mm cannons. Armor-piercing rounds punched through aluminum like tissue paper, severing fuel lines and control cables. The aircraft shuddered, nose dropping as the pilot fought dead controls. Savage threw himself out the door as his own aircraft bucked under impact. Shrapnel sparked off the fuselage behind him. His parachute deployed with a bone-jarring snap, silk blossoming above him as he cleared the burning transport by mere seconds. The wounded C-47 tried to climb, engines screaming against gravity and physics. Fuel streamed from ruptured tanks, creating a vapor trail that caught fire like a fuse. Half the stick was still inside, men he'd trained with, fought beside, shared rations with during the long months since Germany's surrender. Then it exploded. The fireball consumed the entire aircraft in a microsecond of superheated gas and expanding metal. 24 paratroopers simply vanished, men with names and families reduced to constituent atoms scattered across miles of German countryside. The shockwave hit Savage like a physical blow, spinning his parachute lines and filling his ears with thunder. Gridiron's chute billowed 50 meters to Savage's left, the captain fighting his risers as debris from the explosion whistled past. Chunks of aluminum wing, pieces of engine cowling, fragments that might once have been seats or men. All of it tumbling through the darkness while Soviet gunners tracked the remaining aircraft. The third C-47 caught fire as Savage watched. Not an explosion, just flames spreading along the fuselage as incendiary rounds found their mark. The pilot held course long enough for his stick to jump, then the aircraft began its death spiral toward the forest below. Orange flames trailed behind it like a comet, illuminating the canopy until it crashed somewhere beyond the ridgeline. More explosions. The fourth transport taking hits, losing altitude, trailing smoke and sparks, but still flying, still giving its paratroopers a chance to reach the ground alive. Savage yanked his risers, steering away from the heaviest fire. His chute was intact, lines uncut. Below him, the German countryside rushed up with familiar inevitability. He could see muzzle flashes from Soviet positions, hear the crack of rifle fire mixed with the deeper bark of machine guns. The landing was hard but clean. Savage hit, rolled, came up with his Thompson ready. Around him, other chutes were settling into the darkness, white silk ghosts against black earth scattered across kilometers of German forest. No way to count survivors, no way to know who'd made it out of the burning aircraft and who'd been vaporized in the explosions. Gridiron crashed through pine branches 30 meters away, cursing creatively as he fought free of his harness. Blood ran from cuts where broken branches had found gaps in his equipment, but he was moving under his own power. "Sound off!" The captain's voice carried through the trees. "Rally on me!" Savage moved toward the voice, Thompson at the ready. Pine needles crunched under his boots as he navigated between the massive trunks. Other figures emerged from the darkness, paratroopers gathering their gear, checking weapons, forming up by instinct despite the chaos. "Here, sir," Savage called out, identifying himself. "Franklin reporting." "Walsh, sir." One by one, voices called out from the forest. Maybe a dozen men from their stick had landed in this sector. How many others were scattered across the drop zone was anybody's guess. A shadow materialized from behind a pine tree, moving with absolute silence. Savage's Thompson swung toward the movement before he recognized the distinctive Ranger tab on the man's shoulder. Sergeant Charlie Ironknife, one of Colonel Boyer's hand-picked specialists transferred from the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Savage didn't know much about the man except that Boyer seemed to collect unusual soldiers for reasons he never explained. "Sergeant Ironknife, reporting." The voice was calm, controlled. No wasted words. "Outstanding," Gridiron replied, relief evident in his tone. Rangers meant training, competence, the kind of professional soldier who could function when everything went to hell. Ironknife's head tilted, listening to something in the darkness. Distant gunfire echoed through the forest, scattered rifle shots, the occasional burst from an automatic weapon. Too far away to be immediate threat, close enough to know other survivors were in contact. "Scattered drop," Ironknife reported. "Wind carried us off target. Soviet positions are northeast, between us and the village. Other sticks landed closer to the guns." More paratroopers emerged from the darkness. Corporal Barnes, with his glasses somehow still intact. Young Private Sullivan, fresh from jump school, eyes wide with the realization that training and reality were different animals. A radio man named Murphy, his SCR-300 strapped to his back, already trying to raise other elements on the command frequency. "Any contact?" Murphy reported, static crackling from his handset. "This is Able 6, calling any station. Over." Nothing but static answered him. Soviets are jamming communications, Gridiron decided. Or our radios got scrambled in the drop. Either way, we're on our own until we link up with other survivors. Iron Knife studied the forest around them, head cocked like he was listening to voices others couldn't hear. His fingers touched pine bark, feeling for something that escaped Savage's understanding. The ranger moved like he belonged in these woods, like he'd been born to navigate darkness and danger. Saw the village burning on the way down, Iron Knife reported, his voice barely above a whisper. That light, it's not natural. Purple fire, reaching up maybe 200 feet. Armor positions look to be on the far side of the village. At least 2 tanks, maybe more. Infantry spread through the forest between us and the target. Gridiron processed the intelligence, his West Point training calculating distances and approaches. How far to the village? 3 kilometers northeast, through heavy timber, then open ground for the last 500 meters. Iron Knife's eyes tracked movement in the darkness that others missed. Soviet positions are dug in good. They're not planning to leave anytime soon. Gridiron folded his map, tucking it into his field jacket. We move toward the village. Reconnaissance first, engagement only if necessary. He looked at each man in turn. Stay quiet. Stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into. The squad formed up in tactical formation, Iron Knife taking point with the natural silence of a man born to hunt. They moved through the forest like ghosts, boots finding soft ground between fallen branches, weapons held ready but not threatening the shadows. 20 minutes into their advance, Iron Knife raised his fist. The squad froze. 15 feet above them, tangled in pine branches, hung the body of an American paratrooper. His chute had caught in the canopy, suspension lines twisted around his neck. The man swayed slightly in the night breeze, uniform torn where branches had clawed at him during his final struggle. "Oh, hell," Murphy whispered. Gridiron studied the corpse, noting the unit patches and equipment. "Mark the position," he ordered Barnes, who pulled out a grease pencil and marked their map. "We'll send recovery teams when this is over." Private Sullivan started to move past the tree when Iron Knife grabbed his shoulder. The ranger pointed upward. Strapped to the dead paratrooper's back was an M2 flamethrower. Fuel tanks intact, ignition system undamaged by the violent landing. "Those have come in handy in the past," Iron Knife said quietly. "Might need it where we're going." Without waiting for orders, the ranger began climbing. His movements were fluid, finding handholds on bark and branches with practiced ease. He reached the suspended body and worked quickly, cutting through the equipment straps with his combat knife. The flamethrower came free, fuel sloshing in the tanks as Iron Knife lowered it carefully to the ground. 60 pounds of liquid fire, he reported, checking the fuel gauge and ignition system. "Full tanks, ready to burn." "I'll take it," volunteered Private Franklin, stepping forward. The young paratrooper had broad shoulders from 2 years of farm work before the war, strong enough to carry the extra weight without slowing the squad down. He shrugged off his pack, letting Iron Knife help him into the flamethrower's harness. The fuel tank settled against Franklin's back with a metallic thunk. He tested the weapon's balance, adjusting the shoulder straps until the weight distributed evenly. The nozzle felt heavy in his hands, but familiar. He'd trained with flamethrowers at Benning, though he'd never used one in combat. "Stay in the middle of the formation," Gridiron ordered. "That thing makes you a priority target if we hit contact." Franklin nodded, checking the ignition pilot light. A small blue flame flickered at the nozzle's tip, ready to turn liquid fuel into a stream of death. Whatever was burning in that village with impossible colors, conventional fire might be their only answer. The sounds of gunfire never let up as they moved through the forest. Constant chatter of automatic weapons, the crack of rifles, occasional explosions that shook pine needles from branches overhead. It was like the Soviets were fighting a full-scale battle, but the math didn't add up. There hadn't been that many paratroopers in the drop, maybe 60 survivors scattered across the countryside. Not enough to sustain this level of combat. "Sounds like World War III out there," Murphy muttered, adjusting his radio pack. Iron Knife led them to the village outskirts, where a small copse of birch trees provided concealment at the edge of cleared farmland. Beyond the tree line, Malzhausen burned with its unnatural purple glow, casting everything in alien light that made shadows move wrong. Private Sullivan was about to step into the open when Iron Knife's hand clamped down on his shoulder like a steel trap. Stop, the ranger whispered. Iron Knife pointed to what looked like a soggy pile of trash at the base of a birch tree. Wet cloth, maybe old rags left by farmers. But something about the shape bothered him. Check it, Gridiron ordered. Sullivan approached cautiously, extending his M1 Garand to poke at the pile. The bayonet sank into something soft that gave way with a wet squelch. The fabric shifted, revealing pale bone underneath. A human skull, eye sockets empty, jaw hanging open in a silent scream. Jesus Christ! Sullivan jerked his rifle back, stumbling away from the remains. Iron Knife's eyes swept their immediate area with new intensity. Now that he knew what to look for, details emerged from the darkness that he'd initially dismissed. Strange vines hanging from birch branches, not local vegetation, but something else entirely. Thick, fleshy tendrils that blended perfectly with bark and shadow, almost invisible until movement betrayed their presence. "We're not alone out here," he said quietly, hand moving to his tomahawk. The vines swayed without wind, reaching toward the warmth of living bodies like blind snakes testing the air. One tendril brushed against Corporal Barnes's shoulder as he crouched behind cover. The contact was gentle, almost curious. Then suddenly the vine coiled around his torso like a steel cable. "What the—" Barnes's words cut off as the tendril constricted, lifting him off his feet with inhuman strength. A wet, slurping noise filled the air, like a massive tongue being retracted. Barnes clawed at the vine wrapped around his chest, boots kicking frantically as he was dragged upward into the canopy. Above them, something shifted in the birch branches. Bark peeled away to reveal a fleshy mass the size of a steamer trunk, parasitically attached to the tree's trunk. Rows of needle-sharp teeth ringed a gaping maw that pulsed with digestive fluids. The vine wasn't separate from the creature. It was its feeding apparatus, reeling in prey like a fishing line. Barnes screamed as he was pulled toward the waiting mouth, his M1 Garand clattering to the forest floor. Iron Knife's tomahawk left his hand in one fluid motion. The steel blade whistled through air, severing the feeding tendril 6 inches from Barnes's chest. Black ichor sprayed from the cut as the creature shrieked, a sound like steam escaping from a ruptured boiler. Barnes crashed to the ground, still wrapped in the severed vine, gasping and retching. "Open fire!" Gridiron shouted. The squad's weapons erupted simultaneously. Thompson's submachine guns chattered, M1 Garands cracked, Franklin's BAR hammered out sustained bursts. Bullets punched into the fleshy mass, each impact producing wet, slapping sounds and gouts of dark fluid. The creature writhed against the tree trunk, more feeding tendrils lashing out blindly. Murphy dove aside as one whipped past his head. Sullivan put 6 Garand round center mass into the thing's bulk, watching chunks of meat tear away under the heavy 30-06 impacts. The gunfire revealed the true scope of their predicament. Muzzle flashes illuminated the canopy, exposing more fleshy masses attached to birch trunks throughout the copse. Dozens of them. What had looked like a small grove of trees was actually a feeding ground, each trunk hosting one of the parasitic creatures. But they died easily. Too easily for something so alien. Franklin's BAR stitched a line across 3 creatures simultaneously. The heavy rounds tore through their soft tissue like paper, spraying black ichor across white bark. The things convulsed once and went still, their feeding tendrils going limp. "Keep firing!" Gridiron ordered, his Thompson cutting down another creature that had been reaching for Sullivan. "Clear the canopy!" Within 30 seconds, the cops fell silent, except for the drip of alien blood and the labored breathing of exhausted soldiers. Barnes struggled free from the severed tendril, his uniform torn but otherwise unharmed. "What the hell are those things?" Sullivan gasped, reloading his Garand with shaking hands. Iron Knife retrieved his tomahawk from where it had embedded in a birch trunk, wiping black ichor from the blade. "Not from around here," he said simply. "We need to find a defensible position in the village," Savage recommended, studying the burning buildings through his field glasses. "Hold until Patton's armor and reinforcements arrive." An eerie scream echoed from Malzhausen's smoke-shrouded streets. Not human, but not entirely inhuman either. Something between agony and hunger, carried on the night wind like a siren call. Through the purple-tinged haze, figures emerged from the village. German civilians in work clothes, Soviet soldiers in winter camouflage, all moving with the same shambling gait. Their bodies were wrapped in bluish vines that pulsed with alien life, the tendrils woven through their clothing and around their limbs like parasitic jewelry. "Civilians!" Murphy called out, raising his hand. He switched to broken German. "Wir sind amerikanische Soldaten. We are American soldiers." No response. The shambling figures continued their approach, eyes vacant, movements mechanical. Murphy tried Russian, his pronunciation rough but understandable. "My amerikanskie soldati. We are American soldiers." Still nothing. The lead figure, an old German farmer in overalls, drew within 5 feet of Murphy's position. The radio man lowered his weapon slightly, unwilling to fire on what looked like innocent civilians. Then the farmer's arms stretched impossibly far. The bluish vines wrapped around his limbs suddenly extended like rubber bands, carrying his grasping hands toward Murphy with inhuman reach. What should have been a 3-foot gap became nothing as vine-enhanced arms stretched to grab the American soldier. Fingers closed around Murphy's throat just as claws erupted from the farmer's fingertips, rending uniform and flesh in equal measure. The squad stood transfixed for a heartbeat, minds refusing to process what they were witnessing. German farmers didn't have arms that stretched like taffy. Soviet soldiers didn't have vines growing through their bodies. This violated every assumption about reality they'd carried into combat. Gridiron was the first to break from the paralysis. His Thompson bucked against his shoulder, .45 caliber rounds punching into the farmer's torso. The impacts staggered the creature but didn't drop it. Black ichor leaked from the wounds, but the thing kept clawing at Murphy with those impossibly extended arms. Iron knife's sharp eyes caught details others missed, the strange glow emanating from the creature's eye sockets. Not reflection from the purple fire, but an internal luminescence that pulsed with the same rhythm as the vines wrapped around their bodies. "Their eyes," he called out. "Something's wrong about their eyes." The rest of the squad opened fire, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. Sullivan's Garand cracked repeatedly, placing rounds center mass into a shambling Soviet soldier. The bullets tore through uniform and flesh, but the creature kept advancing. Barnes's Thompson chattered, spraying a burst across 3 figures at close range. They stumbled, but didn't fall. Savage took careful aim at the farmer still grappling with Murphy. His Thompson's front sight settled on the creature's forehead. He squeezed the trigger, sending a .45 slug through the skull. The farmer's head snapped back, the strange glow in its eyes extinguished instantly. The body crumpled, vine-wrapped limbs going slack. "Aim for the head!" Savage shouted over the gunfire. "Headshots, drop them!" Franklin opened up with his bar, walking fire across the approaching mob. When his rounds found skulls, creatures fell. Body shots just slowed them down, leaking that black ichor, but not stopping their advance. More figures emerged from the purple-lit smoke of Malzhausen, shambling toward the sound of gunfire with mechanical persistence. Gridiron's position was about to be overrun when muzzle flashes erupted from the creature's left flank. "Contact left!" someone shouted in English. American voices, American weapons. A second group of paratroopers emerged from the tree line, Garands and Thompsons chattering as they caught the shambling mob in a deadly crossfire. The creatures, focused solely on Gridiron's squad, had no tactical awareness to respond to the flanking maneuver. "Pour it on!" Lieutenant Baker led 8 survivors from Bravo's stick, his voice carrying over the gunfire. "Headshots only!" The combined firepower of both squads cut through the remaining creatures with brutal efficiency. When the last shambler dropped, its vine-wrapped body twitching once before going still, an eerie silence fell over the cops. The bluish vines that had animated the corpses began to wither and die, their alien glow fading to gray. "Jesus, am I glad to see you boys," Gridiron called out as the 2 groups linked up. "What's your situation?" "Lost half my stick in the drop," Baker reported, reloading his Thompson. "Been fighting these things since we hit the ground. They're all over the forest." Iron Knife studied the dead creatures, noting how the vines crumbled to ash as the strange light died from their eyes. "Whatever's controlling them, it's coming from the village." The combined force of 23 paratroopers moved through the village streets from the western edge, boots crunching on debris and broken glass. Most of the buildings showed fire damage, but the stone construction had prevented total collapse. They found a two-story farmhouse near the village center, its thick walls and elevated position offering perfect overwatch of the crash site. "Set up on the second floor," Gridiron ordered. "Windows facing the square. I want eyes on everything." Iron Knife and Savage took positions at the front windows while Franklin positioned his BAR to cover the approach routes. The rest of the squad spread through the farmhouse, checking for threats and establishing fields of fire. From the second floor, the full scope of the crash became visible. The alien craft dominated the village center, a massive hulk easily the size of a warehouse, its crude hull plating twisted and torn from the violent impact. The thing had plowed a furrow through half the settlement, scattering debris across cobblestones and into surrounding buildings. Soviet vehicles clustered near the impact site like metal carrion birds. Several gas trucks sat with their doors hanging open, cargo scattered in the mud. A command vehicle with radio antennas sprouting from its roof sat motionless, engine still running but no crew visible. An ammunition truck had its tailgate down, wooden crates spilled across the cobblestones. "Where are all the Russians?" Lieutenant Baker asked, scanning the area through his field glasses. Gridiron studied the scene, his tactical mind processing the implications. "Maybe they got too close to whatever's in that wreckage. Could be some kind of Nazi superweapon, experimental aircraft, new rocket technology, something that killed the crew when they investigated." Iron Knife's expression remained neutral, but his eyes tracked movement others couldn't see. Shadows that shifted wrong around the abandoned vehicles, the way smoke curled against prevailing winds, signs that told him the Soviet crews hadn't simply died, they'd become something else. "Sir," Franklin called from his BAR position. "Movement around the command vehicle. Can't make out details through this smoke." A metallic grinding sound echoed from the wreckage, not the creak of cooling metal, but something moving with mechanical purpose. Through the smoke and debris, a massive figure stumbled from the craft's torn hull. "What the hell is that?" Baker whispered. The thing stood 12 feet tall, humanoid but clearly mechanical. Its body was composed of interlocking metal plates that shifted and reconfigured as it moved. A green battle mask covered its face, sensor arrays glowing with malevolent intelligence. It moved with predatory grace despite its size, scanning the village with obvious hostility. The mechanical being tripped over a Soviet gas truck, metal foot catching on the vehicle's bumper. Instead of steadying itself, it simply reached down and grabbed the entire truck, 2 tons of steel and machinery, lifting it overhead like a toy. The creature hurled the vehicle toward the hillside where Ryzhkov's tanks maintained their positions. The truck cartwheeled through the air, trailing fuel and debris before crashing into the tree line 50 meters short of the Soviet armor. Immediately, the T-34s responded. Both 85mm cannons boomed simultaneously, high explosive shells streaking toward the mechanical intruder. Direct hits. The explosions engulfed the creature in smoke and flame, chunks of debris flying in all directions. When the smoke cleared, the thing was gone. In its place stood something that defied comprehension. A massive cannon with organic curves and technological complexity that hurt to look at directly. Energy crackled along its barrel, building to a crescendo that made the air itself vibrate. The weapon fired, not a shell or projectile, but a sphere of absolute darkness that warped reality around it. The void bubble struck the lead T-34 and simply erased it. Not destroyed, not damaged, but removed from existence entirely. Where 35 tons of Soviet steel had been, only empty air remained. "Jesus Christ," Savage breathed. "What are we dealing with here?" The remaining T-34 began reversing frantically from the combat zone, its tracks churning mud as the tank commander realized conventional weapons were useless against whatever they faced. The massive cannon platform shifted and reconfigured with mechanical precision, metal plates sliding and locking into humanoid form. The green battle mask fixed its glowing sensors on the retreating armor with predatory interest. More movement from the crashed ship's hull. Smaller mechanical forms emerged from the wreckage, quadrupedal hunters the size of large dogs, but built from the same alien technology. Their metal jaws worked rhythmically, chewing on something that had once worn Soviet winter camouflage. Clean up this mess, the tall mechanical being said, its voice carrying across the village like grinding gears. I have work to do. The creature turned and began staggering back toward the ship's interior, movement suggesting damage from the tank rounds despite its apparent immunity to conventional weapons. Before it could reach the hull breach, rocket-propelled grenades streaked from 3 different buildings around the square. Soviet anti-tank teams, survivors from Ryzhkov's company, had positioned themselves for ambush. The RPGs converged on the mechanical giant from multiple angles. With inhuman reflexes, the creature snatched one of the incoming rockets from the air. Its massive hand closed around the warhead just inches from impact. Without breaking stride, it hurled the projectile back toward the building it had come from. The explosion collapsed half the structure, burying the Soviet team in rubble and flame. The mechanical hounds responded to the other threats with terrifying efficiency. They bounded across the square faster than any living predator, metal claws sparking on cobblestones. The remaining anti-tank teams had seconds to fire again before the creatures were among them, rending through Soviet soldiers with savage precision. Screams echoed from the buildings as the hounds set to work. Metal claws tore through winter uniforms and flesh with equal ease, disemboweling men who'd survived 3 years of mechanized warfare only to be eviscerated by predators from another world. Blood painted cobblestones as the creatures methodically unlived every Soviet position around the square. One Russian soldier tried to flee from a collapsed building, his left arm hanging useless from shrapnel wounds. A mechanical hound caught him 3 steps from cover, metal jaws clamping down on his torso. The creature shook its head like a terrier with a rat, vertebrae snapping audibly before flinging the corpse aside to hunt fresh prey. Another team tried to make a stand in the baker's shop, firing their remaining RPG through the shattered storefront. The warhead struck one hound center mass, the explosion obscuring it in smoke and debris. When the dust cleared, another creature emerged with superficial scoring on its metal hide, sensor arrays glowing brighter with what might have been anger. It bounded through the window, and the screaming that followed was mercifully brief. From the farmhouse, the American paratroopers watched in horrified fascination as the Soviet resistance died with mechanical thoroughness. Within minutes, the square fell silent, except for the hiss of cooling metal and the steady drip of fluids that had once circulated through living bodies. "Well, Pilgrim," Gridiron drawled in his best John Wayne impression, "looks like we ain't in Kansas anymore." The humor fell flat in the blood-soaked square below. He cleared his throat, returning to his normal voice. "Savage, we are completely out of our scope here. This is way beyond anything they taught us at the point." Savage lowered his field glasses, face grim. "Whatever those things are, they're not German, not Soviet either. Something else entirely." "The general sent us to recon," Gridiron decided. "We need intel on whether this is a threat to American forces. Can these things be stopped? What are their capabilities? How many more might be out there?" Iron Knife studied the massive ship through the farmhouse window. "High explosives seem to affect the big one. Staggered it anyway. Rocket killed one of the small ones. Maybe we mine the entry point, prevent them from getting reinforcements out of that hull." "Good thinking. Set charges on—" A new sound interrupted their planning, screaming from the village outskirts, human voices crying out in German and Russian. The mechanical hounds had begun a systematic house-to-house sweep, dragging out Soviet soldiers and German peasants who'd managed to hide during the initial slaughter. Through their windows, the Americans watched as 3 Russians were hauled from a root cellar, their boots scraping furrows in the dirt as they fought against metal claws. The creatures dragged them toward the ship's hull breach like cats bringing mice to their master. One soldier broke free and ran 20 yards before a hound bounded after him, bringing him down with casual efficiency. "Those things are collecting prisoners," Baker observed, "taking them alive." "For what?" Franklin asked, though his tone suggested he didn't want to know the answer. The systematic clearing continued as they finalized their reconnaissance plan. Whatever was happening inside that crashed ship, the Americans needed intelligence before Patton's armor arrived. Whether any of them would live to report it remained to be seen. The systematic clearing continued as they finalized their reconnaissance plan. Whatever was happening inside that crashed ship, the Americans needed intelligence before Patton's armor arrived. One of the dragged prisoners, a young Soviet private, broke free from a mechanical hound's grip and stumbled backward. His boots slipped on the cobblestones slick with alien fuel that had leaked from the ship's ruptured hull. He fell hard into a puddle of the phosphorescent liquid. The effect was immediate. Glowing vines erupted from the fuel, wrapping around the soldier's body like living cables. The tendrils burrowed through his uniform, seeking contact with flesh. Where they touched, his skin took on that same bluish luminescence the paratroopers had seen on the shambling villagers. The private screamed as the vines penetrated deeper, weaving through his nervous system with surgical precision. His eyes began to glow with that same alien light. Within seconds, his struggles ceased. He stood with mechanical precision, then froze as the mechanical hound approached. The creature grabbed the transformed soldier without ceremony, metal claws clamping around his torso. It dragged him toward the ship's hull breach along with the other prisoners, treating the newly converted human no differently than the others. Whatever intelligence controlled these machines apparently had use for both the living and the transformed. That's how they're making those things, Savage realized. The fuel. It's some kind of infection vector. Iron Knife's expression darkened. The whole village is contaminated. Everyone who came in contact with that stuff. More Russians were being dragged toward the ship, some stepping directly through pools of the alien substance. But the mechanical hounds collected them all regardless, whether they underwent transformation or remained unchanged. Each prisoner disappeared into the ship's dark interior, their fate unknown. "We need to get word to Patton," Gridiron said grimly. "If our boys roll in here without knowing what they're facing." The systematic collection continued as more Soviet holdouts were discovered. The mechanical predators worked with ruthless efficiency, clearing each building methodically before moving to the next. Soon, every survivor in Malzhausen would be aboard that ship. Iron Knife watched the harvest with growing understanding. His eyes tracked the pattern. Living prisoners dragged aboard, transformed, collected just as efficiently. The alien intelligence made no distinction between converted and unconverted humans. All were resources to be gathered. He looked grimly at Gridiron, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are we the fuel?" The question hung in the air like cordite smoke. Around them, the other paratroopers processed the implications. They'd assumed they were observers, scouts gathering intelligence on an unknown threat. But what if they were just the next harvest? What if every human in the area was simply raw material for whatever process was taking place inside that ship? Gridiron's face hardened as the full scope of the threat became clear. If this thing needed humans for fuel, for conversion, for whatever alien purpose, then it wasn't just a threat to the Soviets. Every American soldier, every civilian in the occupation zone, every person on the continent was potential raw material for these machines. "Well, that tears it," Gridiron drawled, channeling the Duke again. "A man's got to do what a man's got to do." His voice shifted back to command authority. "We're not letting this thing harvest Americans. We stop it right here, right now." He turned to face his men, West Point leadership training taking over. "Listen up. We're going in hard and fast. Iron Knife, I want you and Barnes to mine the entrance. Demo charges set for remote detonation in case we fail. Everyone else, we breach that hull and plant explosives inside. Blow the whole damn thing apart before it can spread." "Sir," Franklin spoke up, flamethrower tanks heavy on his shoulders. "What about the mechanical dogs?" "We go through them. Whatever it takes." Gridiron checked his Thompson, chambering around. "This thing dies here, or it kills us trying. Those are the only two options that keep American freedom intact." The paratroopers began their final equipment check, knowing they were about to assault something that had casually erased a Soviet tank. But the alternative, letting it spread beyond this village, was unthinkable. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. I'm Thomas Richter, and it's been an honor to share this story with you. If you're ready for your next mission, we've got a full arsenal of series waiting for you on this platform. Each one is locked and loaded with the kind of stories that keep you pressing forward no matter what. For those who march to the beat of our soundtrack, all of our music is deployed across every major streaming platform: Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, you name it. Just search for Springfield Syndrome or the audiobook title to add it to your playlist. Your support keeps us in the fight, and we'd be grateful if you'd drop us a review wherever you grab this audiobook. Your feedback is our intel. It helps us improve our operations and helps other listeners find their next objective. Stay strong, stay sharp, and remember, the only easy day was yesterday. This is Thomas Richter, signing off.